In August 2009, the Center for Naval Analyses published Insurgent Tactics in Southern Afghanistan. The intended audience, the authors write, is soldiers and Marines deployed or getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan. Among their warnings were, "You're being watched." The Taliban operates an extensive network of informers and forward observers that keep close watch on the movement of coalition forces, whether by foot, vehicle, or helicopter. It is safe to say that the enemy is aware of most patrols and convoys and can predict where they will go and by what route. The authors aimed not only to warn the troops, but also to briefly introduce them to who they'd be fighting. The Pashtun tribesmen who fill the ranks of the Taliban were raised in a culture of perpetual guerrilla warfare. Most learn to fight at an early age and are natural infantrymen, physically fit, comfortable with a rifle, and used to extreme hardship and risk. They are naturals at fire and maneuver and at moving quickly across difficult terrain. They are also well versed in evasion and escape and know how to avoid artillery and airstrikes. Against such an adversary, technology and heavy firepower are no substitute for aggressive infantry tactics, rapid maneuver, blocking positions, immediate closure, and pursuit. Few places have seen as many rulers come and go as Afghanistan, a veritable crossroads of empires. From Alexander the Great's brief tenure to the Islamic conquests, the Mongol invasion, and Mughal rule, Afghanistan remained a strategic prize. Central Asia later became a battleground in the Great Game, the colonial rivalry between the Russian and British empires. Afghanistan's heartland and hinterland were battlegrounds of the Afghan wars. In these wars, British soldiers were at the mercy of Afghan marksmen, who, with their jezails, effectively used the rugged terrain as shield and sanctuary. Indeed, the British spent nearly a century trying to control Afghanistan. Their first attempt to conquer the country was in 1839. It was a disaster. Only one man survived the retreat from Kabul. They tried again in 1879. Things went not quite so bad. Their soldiers lost a major battle, the legendary Battle of Maiwand in 1880, but got out before there could be any catastrophic rout. Britain gave up on interfering in Afghan affairs in 1919 when Afghanistan attacked their forces, wary from the First World War, on the frontier. As a result of their fierce resistance, Afghanistan never became a colony of a Western power. Not only a crossroad of empires, Afghanistan is commonly referred to as a graveyard of empires. In another famous defeat, the Soviet Union itself didn't last long after their withdrawal in 1989. In November of 1994, the U.S. consulate in Peshawar cabled Washington, informing them of a new movement, the Taliban. Later that month, a U.S. Embassy Islamabad cable discusses the origins, goals, and sponsors of the Taliban, or Religious Students Movement. The organization appears to have its origins in the jihadi group of the same name, which consisted of Pashtun madrasa students from Afghanistan's southwest who fought with distinction against the Soviets. Following the Soviet withdrawal, Afghanistan was plunged into civil war, and it was in this context that the new Taliban, Religious Seekers or Students movement, began in Kandahar province last spring, with a declared mission to open up the roads and end the organized banditry of local commanders. The statement of one quoted source is especially interesting in hindsight. "They're trained to be mullahs," said one source, "and they don't understand logistics or administration. How far can they go?" These new Taliban were resourceful and could very well comprise a challenge to the warlord rule in the country, write the embassy in Pakistan in January 1995. Recent visitors to Kandahar city say the Taliban are well-armed, militarily proficient, and eager to expand their influence. This cable notes the Taliban's desire to replace the ad hoc banditry and local rule of small militias with strict Sharia law. In an especially fascinating document, in February, the embassy in Islamabad relays intelligence from a Taliban insider. He tells the story of the movement's leader. a poor man named Muhammad Omar. Mullah Omar had earned a reputation for bravery and soldiering during the jihad, losing an eye in the process. This followed the Taliban's capture of Herat in 1995, unseating the warlord Ismail Khan, whom U.S. Embassy Islamabad called politically and militarily inept. The Taliban, in contrast, were extremely well organized, well financed, and exhibited strong discipline. On September 28, 1996, the State Department instructed their embassy in Pakistan to make contact with the new government of Afghanistan, following the Taliban's takeover of the capital. "We recognize that the Taliban now control Kabul and much of the country. We were dismayed by the violation of UN premises when your forces entered Kabul and by the summary execution of former President Najibullah." Among other questions they had for the Taliban, do you know the location of ex-Saudi financier and radical Islamist Osama bin Laden? We had heard previously that he was in the eastern provinces. His continued presence here would not, we believe, serve Afghanistan's interests. Just weeks after 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld delivers the foundational document of the American invasion of Afghanistan to his Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Among other U.S. goals, terminate the rule of the Taliban and their leadership. Al-Qaeda and the Taliban's main assets are people. They must be destroyed. Writes Antonio Giustozzi in The Taliban at War. Following September 11, 2001, Taliban forces were obliterated in a lightning war prosecuted by American Special Forces and their Afghan allies, supported by an armada of warplanes. These included F-15s, F-18s, B-2 bombers, AC-130 gunships, and the hulking B-52. U.S. forces dropped 5,000-pound bunker busters and the 15,000-pound BLU-82, the Daisy Cutter. PBS reported round-the-clock bombing with B-52s and B-1 bombers, dropping 500-pound unguided bombs and 1,000-pound cluster bombs on Taliban troops and garrison targets, though observers say sites near the capital, Kabul, received the heaviest strikes to date. Human Rights Watch condemned the indiscriminate nature of cluster bombs and also reported that bombing raids hit facilities belonging to UN agencies and the International Committee of the Red Cross. Indeed, they bombed a Red Cross warehouse in Kabul, destroying supplies. Despite further consultations between the Red Cross and the U.S., the same compound was struck again by U.S. forces on October 26th. According to the Red Cross, food and non-food items meant for 55,000 people were destroyed in the second attack. The human toll is evident in the plight of the refugees. Hundreds of thousands of Afghans were displaced during the year from their homes within Afghanistan. Not many in-depth studies of the civilian cost of U.S. bombardment exist. One Mark Harold gave sobering numbers for a September 2002 issue of the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research. Examining the first 20 weeks of U.S. bombing of Afghanistan reveals the following human cost of this attack. Well over 3,000 civilians killed directly by bombs and missiles, another 4,000 to 6,500 civilians injured, many requiring prostheses, 4,000 to 6,000 dead Taliban and allies, an additional estimated 19,800 Afghan refugees dying of hunger, disease, and cold in camps. Other deadly consequences include the scattering of thousands of cluster bomblets, the use of depleted uranium, and the destruction of infrastructure, including bridges, power plants, water supplies, roads, communication systems, electrical power plants. The most severe consequence was cutting off power to hospitals and clinics, which were compelled to use diesel generators. Numerous reports exist of the deplorable conditions in hospitals, lack of supplies, staff who fled, operating without anesthetic on the injured, cramped facilities, etc. Hospitals resorted to diesel-powered generators, but diesel fuel became very scarce once U.S. planes targeted privately owned fuel trucks. The destruction of electrical power supplies also hampered the operation of Afghanistan's meager clean water treatment and sewage treatment plants. Along with the decision of U.S. military planners to bomb perceived military targets in urban areas, The use of weapons with great destructive blast and fragmentation power necessarily resulted in heavy civilian casualties. The weapon of choice during the first 3 weeks of the air campaign was the 500-pound bomb, which has a lethal blast range of 20 meters. Later, the 2,000-pound bomb became the weapon of choice, and it has a lethal blast range of 34 meters. The Taliban also suffered a devastating collapse of their emirate, which ceased to exist as a physical entity. Indeed, even ABC reported the Taliban were carpet-bombed. Sami Yousafzai interviewed a number of Taliban fighters, comprising an oral history of the Afghanistan war. One of the Taliban interviewed spoke of the bombing. The entire government started to fall apart. I never thought the Taliban would collapse so quickly and cruelly under US bombs. Another one of them concurs. When the bombing started, I was commanding some 400 fighters on the front lines. The bombs cut down our men like a reaper harvesting wheat. Bodies were dismembered, dazed fighters were bleeding from the ears and nose from the bomb's concussions. We couldn't bury the dead. Our reinforcements died in their trenches. So the Taliban retreated. It would take them years to recover. On February 3, 2006, Taliban fighters launched RPGs into the police headquarters at Musa Qala. The district governor, Abdul Quddus, was killed by a direct hit on his headquarters. Fighting with the Afghan police lasted 2 days, killing 28 officers. This clash marked the beginning of the grueling 2006 offensive, authorized directly by Mullah Omar. He'd entrust the operation to his military commander, the legendary Dadullah. When asked about Dadullah by Antonio Giustosi, one Taliban cadre said, "All the people were afraid of him. No one would ever dare to wrong him. He would tell people that either they captured an area or they were not to return to him." Helmand and Kandahar would see the greatest bloodshed in the Great 2006 offensive, with the combined 3,700 police suffering 27% losses, comprising 500 casualties and 500 desertions. The Taliban had also stormed and captured most of Zabul, Farah, Uruzgan, and Ghazni, described in detail in the American War in Afghanistan, where Carter Malkasian writes, "The offensive was one of the most decisive events in America's war in Afghanistan." After the 2006 offensive, the Taliban ruled an impressive amount of territory. They established a degree of stability in their areas that was at least as resilient as what Karzai had provided. Though the front lines were violent, villages within Taliban territory were fairly peaceful, other than the random airstrike or special operations raid. Indeed, after years of laying dormant, save for sporadic hit-and-runs on police and army outposts, the Taliban's guerrilla war had begun in earnest. The Western forces that would be sent in to fight them would be at a number of disadvantages. Mark Selinsky, a veteran defense intelligence analyst and adjunct professor at the United States Army War College, summarized several of them in The Taliban, Afghanistan's most lethal insurgents. As historical accounts of invading armies attest, Afghanistan is ideally suited for insurgency warfare. The unforgiving harshness of the land offers strong tactical advantage to insurgents who can command the forbidding mountains and valleys with their intimate knowledge of the terrain. The works contained in Poetry of the Taliban are most valuable when studying the Taliban's intimate attachment to the geography of their homeland. Writes one mujahid, "My home is the mountain, my village is the mountain, and I live in the mountains. I know the black ditches. I always carry a rocket launcher on my shoulder. I know the hot trenches. I always ambush the enemy. I know war, conflict, and disputes." The Strategic Studies Division at the Center for Naval Analyses was also mindful of the challenges posed by Afghanistan's diverse geography and flora. From 2006 to 2008, the Taliban showed themselves to be skilled in several aspects of small unit tactics. Most of all, their fieldcraft was superb. The lush Helmand River Valley proved surprisingly fertile ground for guerrilla tactics. The insurgents used 2-meter-high poppy fields, orchards, thick mud walls, and a system of interlocking canals and irrigation ditches for cover and concealment. The authors of this study illustrate an adversary that learns quickly and is utterly devoted. Afghan insurgents can be brave and tenacious, with a gift for small unit tactics. They have frequently engaged US and NATO forces directly, often for long periods, and made effective use of fire and maneuver, including flanking and encirclement. At times, they have pinned down patrols and closed in for the kill. They have launched hundreds of attacks on fortified bases and raised the cost of maintaining these positions by targeting coalition supply lines with IEDs and ambushes. When attacked, Afghan insurgents often counterattack and maintain contact even when faced with vastly superior firepower. On many occasions, they have fought through airstrikes and intense artillery bombardment. Taliban fighters protecting high-level commanders have been known to stand their ground in the face of certain death. They almost never surrender. Their tactics had barely changed since the 1980s. Flanking, encirclement, and L-shaped ambushes were all perfected during the war against the Soviets. They learned early on, as others fighting foreign occupation do, that smaller units stretched far and wide are preferable to conventional tactics, certainly to human wave attacks, which can easily be mowed down or bombed into oblivion. Most ambushes began with a volley of RPGs, followed by small arms fire. In most attacks, the insurgents broke contact before air support arrived, though in a minority of cases they fought through airstrikes. Indeed, the value in the tried-and-true hit-and-run ambush is unmistakable. The insurgents rarely took serious casualties in hit-and-run ambushes. Their command and control often broke down when US or British forces struck from multiple directions and closed, yet Taliban fighters were rarely cornered. Noteworthy is the fact that an ominous warning of an impending ambush could be a sudden departure of civilians. The insurgents frequently warned civilians before launching ambushes near populated areas, despite the fact that this practice provides opportunities for coalition forces to receive early warning. As can be gleaned from Zelensky's work, the Taliban were quite resourceful. Hot meals were provided to fighting men, often during long battles. Administrative affairs were decentralized, and each staging ground for battle had a mobile kitchen. The Taliban also gradually improved their healthcare infrastructure in order to treat battle wounds. Writes Justosi, over the years, the Taliban established health commissions. By the end of 2013/early 2014, there were about 80 fixed facilities, including 12 hospitals, mostly in Pakistan, and 68 clinics. Additionally, the Taliban had small, mobile medical teams in each province, as well as cadres in charge of managing the system and evacuating the injured to Pakistan. Overall, more than 4,000 Taliban were employed by the 3 health commissions at the beginning of 2014. The Taliban also displayed a particular strength in human intelligence. Mark Zelensky, himself a veteran spy, observed, "Intelligence plays a vital role in the Taliban's operations. The Taliban cannot match the military capabilities of the coalition forces, so they try to erode the will of the enemy through unconventional tactics. Without strong intelligence, the Taliban would not be able to commit effective suicide bombings, nor could they infiltrate effectively the Afghan military, intelligence, and police. Further, the Taliban have personnel who exclusively focus on intelligence and counterintelligence." The Center for Naval Analyses also warned of the Taliban's intelligence acumen. Forward observers often reported all details of a convoy, such as the number and types of vehicles, the presence of tactical air controllers, whether the convoy was carrying artillery, and so forth. In many areas of Helmand in 2006, it was an accepted fact that if a patrol stayed more than 10 minutes in any one place, it would be ambushed. The Taliban organized over time into different groups based on their specialized skills. Writes Justosi, while the majority of groups were in fact guerrilla units, others specialized in mine-laying, in intelligence, in special operations, heavy weapons, sniping, tax collection, and so forth. The Taliban would avoid associating the specialization of these groups with their names, aware that their communications were being scrutinized by their enemies. C.J. Chivers, writing for the New York Times, was embedded with Weapons Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. He underscores how the watchful eye of the Taliban can have lethal consequences. The Taliban watched the Marines' habits carefully, including how small units react in the first instance of a firefight. This is what they do: shoot and observe where the Marines go, said Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Baker, the battalion's commander. And where the Marines go, this is where they'll put an IED. A persistent problem, evident in the testimony of a Lieutenant Mark Morrison. They've watched us all winter, seeing how we work. Quoted by Julius Cavendish in the Christian Science Monitor, who writes, frequent attacks on Charlie Company's combat outposts with small arms, rocket-propelled grenades, and anti-tank guns testify to the fact that the terrain is perfectly suited to the Taliban's brand of hit-and-run tactics. The explosive blossoming of vines and marijuana fields along Kandahar province's main river allows insurgents to come within close range of their targets without breaking cover. Captain Duke Rhyme, who commanded Charlie Company, bemoaned the cover provided not only to Taliban fighters, but also their IEDs. Everywhere we walk out there could be our last step. Guys are very meticulous about what they do. They pay attention more to where they're walking. To say they're scared, I hate to use that term, but they're just very aware of what they're doing. In a further testament to fear among troops, Corporal Kyle Carpenter, a squad machine gunner, wrote, there really is no way to prepare yourself to get shot at every day, battling for your life in a firefight, having to constantly scan the ground so you don't step on an explosive, but seeing it happen anyway, watching your buddies and your leaders bleed out. In the late 2000s, the Taliban had mustered up considerable confidence, which fueled a number of daring operations, perhaps most successful being the storming of the prison in Kandahar City, where they freed some 1,000 of their countrymen, including some 500 fellow Taliban. Prior to the attack, the Taliban had warned nearby civilians, most of whom left the area. At 9:30 p.m. on the night of June 13, 2008, fighters detonated a tanker truck filled with explosives at the front gate of the prison, blasting a massive hole. A suicide bomber also blew a hole in the back wall of the prison. Fighters on motorbikes zipped in and engaged the guards with RPGs, grenades, and small arms. Some 15 guards were killed from the explosions and bullets. Fighters with belt-fed machine guns fired at the locks on the prison cells, then split the prisoners into groups and walked them out. The attack was extraordinarily successful. The insurgents took no casualties, and all but a few Taliban prisoners escaped unharmed. Several dozen high-level commanders had minibuses waiting for them outside. The rest of them simply walked away. They faced no resistance, as the police didn't even bother to respond. It took a Canadian quick reaction force almost 2 hours to arrive. Perhaps a testament to the progress in the U.S. aims to prop up an Afghan National Army and police. In September 2008, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, told Congress,
I'm not convinced we're winning it in Afghanistan. I am convinced we can.
Scott Shane would articulate the deteriorating situation in an article titled, A Dogged Taliban Chief Rebounds, Vexing U.S., writing, in late 2001, Mullah Muhammad Omar's prospects seemed utterly bleak. 8 years later, Mullah Omar leads an insurgency that has gained steady ground in much of Afghanistan against much better equipped American and NATO forces. Far from a historical footnote, he represents a vexing security challenge for the Obama administration. Quoting former CIA officer Bruce Rydell, an advisor to the new president, this is an amazing story. He staged one of the most remarkable military comebacks in modern history. His reputed humility, his legend as a ferocious fighter against the Soviet invaders in the 1980s, and his success in ending the lawlessness and bloody warlords feuds of the early 1990s cemented his power. His followers adore him, believe in him, and are willing to die for him, said Rahimullah Yousafzai, who interviewed Mullah Omar many times. In August 2009, the Army General Stanley McChrystal, the commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, gave a bleak assessment to Defense Secretary Bob Gates. He concluded the insurgents currently have the initiative and that the overall situation is deteriorating. This was only less than a year after the devastating firefight at the American outpost at Wanat. On July 13, 2008, American and Afghan soldiers came under fire from RPGs and Dishkas. One Sergeant Ryan Pitts was present. Things just started exploding inside our fighting positions. Multiple RPGs were shot at us, along with hand grenades. After 4 grueling hours, the Taliban fighters finally retreated. 9 American soldiers lay dead, with 27 wounded. The battle attracted international news coverage. 2 days later, Americans withdrew from the Waigal district entirely. Withdrawal admitted defeat. The U.S. flooded Afghanistan with troops for a total of some 100,000. This was the surge. In the spring of 2011, the Taliban leadership issued a new directive to shift towards asymmetrical tactics. In the south, this was rolled out with specific training courses. Justozi interviewed one Taliban commander for Marja in May 2012. It's almost 1 year since our training system changed, and now we are focused on getting training for IEDs, making suicide vests, preparing suicide bombers, and conducting guerrilla warfare. The most important weapon in their arsenal, as was the case for the Iraqi resistance, was the IED. They greatly accelerated their production. In Helmand, workshops could build an IED every 15 minutes. Before 2007, most IEDs were made with military explosives, repurposed artillery shells, and bombs. In 2012, ammonium nitrate fertilizer, according to the Pentagon, accounted for 59% of IEDs in Afghanistan and for 90% of casualties. One senior Taliban leader emphasized the importance of these weapons. If there are no IEDs, we cannot defeat the Afghan army. You can see that the army and the Americans say that 80% of their casualties are from IEDs. So why should we stop using them? Apart from IEDs, the adoption of suicide bombing was controversial within the Taliban. But by 2006, the Taliban's paper Al-Samud would underscore the psychological value of the tactic. Let the Americans and their allies know that even though we lack equipment, our faith is unshakable. And with the help of Allah the Almighty, we have created a weapon which you will not be able to face or avoid, i.e., martyrdom operations. We will follow you everywhere, and we will detonate in your face. We will terrify you, even from vacant lands and silent walls. We know we are inevitably heading towards death, so let it be a glorious death. The practice was up to the discretion of various commanders in the field, and was mostly employed by the notorious Haqqani network. Many thought the indiscriminate nature of the tactic allowed for too many civilian casualties. Similarly indiscriminate were the use of 2,000-pound bombs. When the Americans met fierce resistance at 3 Ghilzai villages in the Arkandab River Valley, the commander of the 1st Battalion, 320th Field Artillery Regiment had them flattened. Rather than risk heavy casualties, Lieutenant Colonel David Flynn, the battalion commander, resorted to carpet bombing. And on October 6, 2010, 25 2,000-pound bombs and 50 500-pound bombs destroyed the villages. The U.S. brigade commander responsible for Arghandab, Colonel Jeffrey Martindale, 1st Brigade, 4th Infantry Division, reported, "We obliterated those towns. They're not there at all. These are just parking lots right now." Carpet bombing was not only a source of resentment against the occupation, but also an effective propaganda tool that favored the insurgency. Justozi interviewed one Taliban commander in 2012 who could boast, without much exaggeration given what would transpire upon the U.S. withdrawal years later, "The foreign troops are not so powerful. The only power that they have is air support, and otherwise they cannot stand against us." Hey everyone, GDF here. If you want to support me, consider becoming a patron to watch exclusive videos that aren't up on YouTube, and you can join the Discord server there. Also, I accept donations.